Hello, so my name is Olivia, and I'm going to share about my identity presentation. I've enjoyed seeing all of yours and all of your presentations and your identities, so I'm excited that I get to share now, but I've really enjoyed all of your presentations. So, a little bit about me is who am I? I'm Olivia Duncan. I was born and raised here in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I still live there now and attend Woo Online. When people think about Arizona, they usually think hot, which is fair because a lot of it is. But where I live in Arizona, it's in the northern part, so there's a lot of mountains, a lot of snow in the winter. It's beautiful. I love it here. So I love hiking, I love rivers, I love surfing when I'm in California. I have a little rescue pup, Boone, that I love, and I've had him for almost 3 years. And I love my job working in churches, in ministry, and in their youth and children's ministry. So I threw in some pictures, picture me at my work with my fiance, surfing, and then me and some friends at a Noah Kahan concert because my favorite artist. But today I will be sharing my identity in being a Christian. So I want to talk about how this intersects with other identities that I have. So my identity in being a Christian intersects with my identity in being a woman. So I threw in a picture of myself at a Barbie party because Barbie summer lives on forever. But the reason this intersects with my identity in being a woman is that Jesus, in his ministry, challenged the patriarchy a lot. And at the time Jesus lived, women were not treated well at all. And he let women be a part of his ministry, and women funded his ministry. And even though, like, when people talk about the disciples, they think men, but really, like, women were leading this. They were with Jesus, they were doing ministry with him, which I think is just a beautiful way of feminism and seeing women as equal to men because at the time women weren't seen that way. So, another identity this intersects with is my identity in being bisexual and being proud. And I have many other friends who are also in the LGBTQIA plus community, and church has not always been a safe space for them, which is sad. But church has been a community that has sent people out for their sexual identity and for who they love, which is sad. And I am glad that I work for churches who affirm the community and who support and do things like go to pride parades and find other ways to volunteer in the community. Another way this intersects with my identity that I don't want to go too much into for time, but in my identity and being leftist and how I vote on policies. Because a lot of what I believe as a Christian, I show that in how I vote. So in things like voting for immigration, voting for women's rights, nonviolence, climate change, and taking care of the world, in LGBTQIA rights, and in universal health care. And something else, this intersects in like everything in my life, but the last main one I wanted to touch on is my identity in learning and being interested in learning and being curious. I always have loved learning new things, and I know now I'm studying ASL and interpreting. However, I spend a lot of time learning about theology through my work and in my own life. And if I wasn't in Woo right now learning about ASL and interpreting, I probably would be in seminary school learning about theology because I find it fascinating. So I want to talk about how this has formed throughout my life and how this has shifted and evolved. So I grew up with my parents who were very hurt by religion in the church. So church wasn't really a thing growing up for me. Once I hit middle school, I became very curious about religion and ended up learning more about religion and religious groups. And then in high school, Throughout high school and into college, I spent a lot of time in a specific Christian organization that had done a lot of good things for me, but had also hurt the queer community a lot. And when I wanted to be asked questions and learn more, questions weren't really accepted or received well, and a lot of hurtful things were said to me, but also to many people who I love deeply. And within that community, I met a lot of amazing friends, a lot of people I have great relationships with. I met my fiance, and a lot of great things came from that, but there was also a lot of hurt that came from it as well. So after that, I spent a lot of time deconstructing, going back on my faith in what I believed, and learning and taking time to look at a new perspective and to take time to find myself again. So I put this illustration from an artist that I love. His name online is The Naked Pastor, but he wrote Deconstructing Surgery in Progress. And it's like God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit saying, we're going to open up your heart and change your mind. So we're putting you into a coma, could take years. We may or may not be here when you wake up, which was just something I definitely experienced. There was times when I didn't want anything to do with religion again, and that was valid. And that made sense for the hurt that I had gone through. But ultimately, where I'm at now is if you had told 19-year-old me, fresh out of an evangelical ministry, that I'd be working at a church now, I would have laughed and not thought that's true. I was hurt and shamed for my beliefs, and I was not allowed to have questions. I was told I would go to hell and all these other hurtful things, and that I'd be ashamed. And I was ashamed at the time before I had gone through this process. I was ashamed for who I was. But through learning again and deconstructing, I learned to be myself and to be proud of my beliefs. So I took time to process my hurt and unlearn the American white Jesus vision that I had had, and learn how to love myself again, learn how to love my community, and learn how to ultimately love Jesus again and feel safe being able to say I'm still a Christian when there was a time where I didn't feel safe with that. So I now work for churches that support the community and hire people in the community and fight for things like climate change, healthcare, immigration, and more. I work with children, middle schoolers, high schoolers, and people who have disabilities, and I get to make a safe space for people to come no matter their identity. And I have students who are non-binary, who are transgendered, and it's amazing to now get to make church a safe space for them and to include them and to use inclusive curriculum while learning about theology, which has been amazing. So I just threw in some pictures of my work. I have permission to share these photos with my class. I got permission from the kids and the youth and their families, but there's pictures of me teaching lessons about pride, getting to go to pride parades with my church, getting to speak on Christmas, and still getting to be involved in this community, which has been really cool. But it's been hard. So for stereotypes that I wanted to discuss, there's some that are stereotypes of Christians in general, but there's some stereotypes that are more for progressive or Christians who have deconstructed. So the first ones I wanted to touch on are that we all use the Bible as a how-to guide or as a rule book, which isn't true. The Bible has been interpreted many times. I think there's so many great resources in it and so many great things, but everything the book says isn't meant to be taken literally. All Christians are conservative. That's something I've even thought at times, but there are very many people who will vote liberal and agree with those policies who are also Christian, which sometimes it seems like the conservative view and their perspective is what's seen the most, which can be hard. But there's people of all types. And all Christians just want to convert and change you. Not true. I once was very interested in missionary work and have changed my perspective on that, in that it's great for people to not be religious. It's great for people to have different perspectives and like different religions, and that not everyone has to be a Christian. Some stereotypes about progressive Christians that I've heard and been told are that we're uneducated, which isn't true. I know many people who have studied theology for most of their life, who are some of the most educated people, and they vote liberal and are progressive and have deconstructed their previous views of theology. Another one I want to touch on is that we hate the Bible. That is not true. I think many people who think of liberal Christians think about, oh, you just ignore what the Bible says, or you don't care about the Bible, which isn't true. And the Bible is this book that is a great resource that has poetry and has history in it and has letters to churches and has a bunch of beautiful literature in it, but that's meant to have questions about, and that's not meant to be taken literally. And it's a book that makes us question ourselves and humanity and theology, which is a beautiful thing to have questions. And the last one is that we aren't real Christians for our beliefs. And that's one I've heard a lot. And I don't think anyone has a say on who can be Christian and who can't be Christian. I think everyone or anyone, no matter their perspective, if they want to choose to identify as a Christian, they have a right to. And we don't have a right to say, no, you can't. And that it should be a safe space for people with different beliefs to be able to come and not feel shamed for that. So, benefits and strengths from my identity. I'm curious about religion, and I think curiosity is a beautiful strength to have. The Bible is ancient texts written by people in forms of stories and poetry and letters and more. It's important for us to be curious and have questions because the Bible connects to humanity today, and it connected to humanity back then. And over time, things have changed, and that might make us have more questions now, which is an important thing to have. I have a lot of compassion for people and being kind to those around us, being able to listen and learn from different perspectives. And compassion helps us connect with people in our community. And I also think community is a great benefit that I've had through this identity because it has helped me get through hard times and great times. And I don't only connect with Christian communities. I have had some of my most life-changing conversations with atheists or with people of different faith backgrounds. And I think that that's beautiful and that we can have community in so many different ways. So how has this impacted my worldview? I touched on this earlier, but it's impacted a lot. Pretty much everything I think about in life is impacted by this, but I think my worldview is seen a lot in how I vote. So taking care of the earth, fighting for things like climate change, to protect creation, to welcome immigrants into our country, to love those around us no matter their identity, their socioeconomic background, their gender identity, their sexuality, ability, race, and just being inclusive of all. To stand up for social justice and to learn from oppressed communities, and to be nonviolent and to have peace. So how has this impacted my use of language? Working with people who have disabilities, I've learned a lot on how to use more inclusive language, like instead of saying stand up for this song, say if you are able to stand, or stand if you're able to in a church setting, and not saying things like wheelchair bound and doing things as like a wheelchair user and using words like that. I've also worked with inclusive language in my classrooms at churches, since some of my students are transgendered or non-binary, respecting their pronouns, and like not doing things like saying boys versus girls for a game, because someone might not identify as either one of those and they need to feel safe, and that's okay. And I've also worked on using not only male pronouns, which I feel like can be hard at times when you're growing up with God as like he, him pronouns. But in reality, God is big and vast and transcends gender. So it's okay to use she, her pronouns and think of God as a woman, or use they, them pronouns, because that can be so beautiful. And if God can represent all of us, God can show all pronouns, which is something that's been hard to change, but something I've worked on. So resources, I shared some social media resources. There's Naked Pastor, which I showed some art on presentation, who does awesome illustrations to show how the church has hurt people. There's Beloved Arise, which is a group that we've worked with before, and they create safe spaces for LGBTQ youth of faith, whether it's Christians, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and there's so many ways that they connect with different religions. And I think that that is beautiful. And I think that creating a safe space for all youth is important. Brandon Robertson is someone I followed on TikTok for a while, who's an author, does TED Talks, and has some great resources. And then the Decolonizing Christian, which is dismantling toxic Christianity and recognizing harm Christianity is done through colonialism. And some other resources, if you don't have Instagram or social media, there's Rachel Held Evans, who is an amazing author who unfortunately passed away in 2019, but she wrote a book about Year in the Life of a Biblical Womanhood, which was this beautiful book looking at the Bible and what it says about women. And it was this book that was very empowering and full of feminism. And then there's Rob Bell, one of my favorite authors of all time, who wrote a first big book within this field, was Love Wins, which was a book that took a new perspective on hell and what if hell isn't real. And a lot of people called him a heretic for it, but it was a wonderful book. And then he wrote a book about what is the Bible, which is all about when we look at the Bible from a new perspective with so much more questions and curiosity, it can be so much colorful than if you were to just read, this is what it says, and looking at it from a very black and white perspective and viewing it more with all the color and having all the questions. Another book is Jesus and John Wayne, which looks at the last 75 years of white evangelicalism. And the book re-examines the toxicness of that culture in the male-dominated world of that. And the last resource I have is Untamed by Glennon Doyle, which isn't super like connected with theology, but it's a book about women empowerment and how to trust ourselves and feel confident in setting boundaries. And it's a wonderful book. I recommend it. So my discussion questions I have, if you want to answer how many you want, if you feel comfortable, or just pick one. But the first one is, have you ever had to unlearn something you were raised with? How did that process make you feel? Number two is, if you feel comfortable sharing, how have you experienced hurt from religion? How did that make you feel about the people within that identity? And number three, what are ways that you think churches could become more safe for people? And do you think church is going to be something of the past and not really be a thing in the future? So thank you for listening to my identity presentation.